Hello, everyone. My name is Reese Lindmark, and you are listening to The Reese Show. On the show, we're trying to clarify what a good future looks like. I know we're all a bit sad about late-stage capitalism, and we want to transition to something, but we don't really know what's next. So, on the show, we interview experts about what is emerging, this beautiful future vision that we can all lean into. I hope it gives you a sense of purpose and clarity about the future. If you like the show, feel free to do something about it. You can leave us a 5-star review. You can tell your friends. You can name your first child Reese. Whatever makes you happy. And if you really dig it, we have an online school called Root, where we help folks understand these root level systems to find our route forward. We have cohorts of world-class systems thinkers that run every couple of months. So if you're interested in that, check us out at root.co. That's ROOTE.co. Thanks. Hello, listeners. Today I'm excited to chat with Susan Blackmore. Susan is a visiting professor at the University of Plymouth who researches consciousness, memes, and anomalous experiences. And she wrote the excellent book, The Meme Machine. Sue, thanks so much for being on the show and welcome.
It's a pleasure. At least so far, I think it's a pleasure.
Yeah, exactly. Beautiful.
I'm going to be trouble. I'm going to be trouble. You can tell, can't you?
Exactly. Thus far, it's a pleasure, but who knows where we're going to go. So I think for me, I want to focus a lot today on just like memes, and I think, but before doing that, I mean, your background's really interesting because you do have this like curiosity towards all these different things. And so I just kind of want to understand, like for you, what is the through line that ties all of your work together?
Well, I think you hit the nail on the head because the word curiosity kind of sums it up. And I know this is way, way, way off memes, but as some listeners will know, 1970, as a young student, I had a dramatic out-of-the-body experience. In fact, I would say now it was a mystical experience of all sorts of strange things and ending with a kind of oneness with the universe. That drove me into parapsychology, which is a dead end, in my opinion. You never get anywhere with it. And giving that up, I came to realize that actually the big question in my mind was, well, consciousness at all. And then I realized there were people in what's called consciousness studies, struggling with the deep problems of dualism and how does mind relate to matter and how can they be one and all of that. And that's driven me ever since. Psychedelic experiences have been a lot of that. And now there's research that actually relates what's going on in the brain to those experiences. That's fantastic. And we have the neuroscience to understand why out-of-body experiences happen and which bit of the brain is doing it and so on. So that's taken me along. But the curiosity is, although fired by that still, and that's still the thing late at night having a smoke, I'll be thinking, my mind going, and I'll be thinking about consciousness and what's it doing and how's this work? Those are the questions constantly that propel me. But then the whole memes thing began because Dan Dennett's book, Darwin's Dangerous Idea, came out. And I'd always been fascinated by evolution theory because what Darwin saw is so simple, so elegant, explains so much, and yet it's still counterintuitive, which is why in your country there are people who don't believe in evolution. How can you not believe it? Well, the reason people don't believe is because they don't understand. If you get the idea of the evolutionary algorithm, you just have to copy something lots of times with variation and then select and then copy again. Once people get that, then I think it's very, very, very hard to go back to believing in God and God a creator and so on. So that book kind of threw me, and a student wrote me an essay on memes and consciousness at that time. And I was ill in bed with chronic fatigue at the time when that happened. And I was in bed for nearly a year, staring at the ceiling, reading incredibly slowly because I could only read it like for a quarter of an hour or something before I'd and reading that book so slowly, and then rereading The Selfish Gene, from which, of course, the idea of memes came, reading that incredibly slowly over a few weeks. By the end of that illness, I had a book in my head to write, and that was The Meme Machine. So, where is that the thread with all the other things? I don't know. Just I think I have the great gift, not God-given, given by evolution and luck and whatever, of just being endlessly curious and not being able to just let something go if I don't understand it. Sorry, that was a very long,
Yeah,
rambly
that's
answer,
cool.
but curiosity is what
No,
sums it
no,
up.
that's
Oh,
really interesting.
and
Mhm.
another word, perplexity. My big textbook on
Mm,
consciousness, it's like 600 pages or something or other, and which
yeah.
was a real struggle, and is now in 3 editions. It begins with the word perplexity and it ends with the word perplexity, and it also says what I often say in lectures on consciousness. I want your brain to hurt. Well, brains don't hurt. I want your head to hurt. I want it to hurt more and more, as this lecture goes on, and I want you to go away from this lecture going, nah, I can't bear it, because it's that difficult. So curiosity
That's
and
amazing.
perplexity will do as an answer.
That's cool. No, I love that. I think that well, on one side too, it's like you were living your life and then you had this crazy experience that you didn't expect, and you were like, oh my God. And that kind of like put you on this weird path towards these things of like, what
Yeah.
was this experience, And so then as you said, it's like it pushes you toward this realm of consciousness. And there is something weird about, I do think that saying perplexity is it's a good catch-all for like the kinds of things that curiosity is a fit for, where you're like, whoa, what is this thing? How do these memes work? Or how does consciousness work? Like those things are things that make your head hurt, because you're like trying to read about it. You're trying to understand your own experience. And you're like, this is weird. Like this is hard to kind of wrap your mind around. And then once you kind of, it's something that like for you and for I, it's like, oh, we're kind of attracted to it in this delightful way. So yeah, I think that's very interesting. I'll keep perplexity in my own mind as I go forth in life. Do you think so? Thinking about memes on the meme side of things, like, I mean, and Dan did its book, the Darwin's Dangerous Ideas, so amazing. It feels funny because as I'm reading these books on memes, there's yours, there's his, there's a lot in like the 70s, 80s, 90s, after Selfish Gene, but then it's kind of died out. Like, how do you see the field of memetics over time, and what has it like? How has it evolved? It kind of feels like it's died or something like that. Tell me a little bit more about that progression as for me as a youth coming into it.
It hasn't died, but it's pretty sick. No, that's very unkind to me. Sorry, Memetics, I don't mean that. Um, I would like to take 2 different threads. One is the popular thread, and that, of course, when in 1976, when the Selfish Gene came out, and the idea of memes was invented by Richard Dawkins, there was barely internet. I mean, it was that long ago. And so there was obviously no such thing as internet memes. And he was talking about, well, I suppose I should define a meme, because many people think that internet memes are the only kind of memes. So memes are any kind of information that is copied with variation and selection between people. And that can include between people and a computer and back again, or a book and back again, or whatever. So all of the words in your language, everything we're doing now is memetic transfer. We're throwing memes back and forward at each other. The things that you learn by yourself, for yourself, are not memes. Memes are information that's copied and passed around in culture. So that what happened then was, once internet memes really took off, then that people began to think that was all that memes were. That's very interesting to me, because actually they're a very good example of the evolution of information, because internet memes, the millions and millions, I don't know the latest figures on how many images are uploaded into the cloud every day, but it's an awful lot, and very, very few of them ever get copied, and certainly even fewer get copied like millions of times. So they are a good example, as long as people realize that's all they are, that all of culture is made up of memes too. So at the time, I think both Richard and I were a bit pissed off that people thought that, but actually I'm quite happy about that. So there are an awful lot of books, as you well know, not the sort you're talking about, but the latest great cat videos, or whatever it is, books about that kind of thing. The other thread is the academic thread, and I have often asked myself, and indeed given lectures entitled, why isn't memetics thriving, or something, or what's wrong with memetics, or something like that. And my answer's never very satisfactory, but I think a huge number of people, even academics and clever people who ought to know better, simply don't get it. they don't get it as, I think, well, why don't they get it? I suppose that you have to be willing, which I think you absolutely would be, and the kind of things that you do are really about the idea that information is actually driving its own change. That's a very scary idea to people, but that's what it comes down to, really. Then there are a whole lot of social scientists who hate the idea that evolutionary theory would come into there because it's been threatened in various ways, in other ways in the past. So they don't want Darwinian ideas coming into sociology and whatever. Quite a lot of people, not everyone. And then on the other side, there are some biologists who are scared of the idea of this kind of spoiling people's understanding of Darwinian thinking. It's all about biology. Darwin was primarily about biology, although he did talk about the evolution of languages and the languages becoming extinct. So he's certainly, I think, were Darwin alive now or brought back with incredible technology, he would think this was great. But what really is the problem? I mean, those are problems, but the real problem, as for Darwin, is that Memetics has not been able, till now, to come up with really good predictions of things or findings that would not be found on any other theory and that come out to be so. And unless you have that in any scientific field, you can't make any progress. Now, that's interesting because, as I said, it was so with biology, and it was a long time before the coming together of genetics and the discoveries of understanding of genetics and bringing that together with Darwin's ideas. And I think the same thing is probably happening now with memetics. We're creeping our way towards finding predictions that you would not expect on other theories of culture. And the really critical point about memetics is that the selfish gene, remember that? What about the selfish meme? It's that ideas spread for their own benefit, not necessarily for ours, and not necessarily for the genes. They can be favoring both those things, but they don't have to. They can just be entirely selfish. And that's where I think we are looking and need to look for evidence that shows that memetics does better than other theories.
Yeah, that's fascinating. I think
that
you're
was
right
a terribly
also
long
to
answer.
say
I
that
got carried away on this subject.
No, I think that all these answers are actually not long, but are just informative. And I think that for me, it's an interesting, and you've also been thinking about this for a long time. And so I think that that there's some of it is that folks kind of don't get it. And they're just kind of anti-out. It's like what the information wants things itself. That's kind of weird. And then it kind of encroaches in on other fields in this kind of awkward way. Kind of like the universal acid of Darwinism, and ain't nobody like that. But I think you're right to point out that the predictions are really why it hasn't taken off as a field. And I do think, yeah, it's weird. I mean, I think too, for me, as I'm writing, this book on what information wants and how the current, kind of to some extent updating memetics or whatever for the networked human organism and the networked hive mind that we have now. It's I don't know. It's kind of a funny thing where it's I'm talking about this thing that's kind of been not relegated, but it's people are a little bit more skeptical of it. And if you talk about it in other ways as cultural evolution or things like that, then people are more game for it. So I don't know. I think but I just think that the other thing for me, why I'm so bullish on it is because so much of as humans, our frame on life comes from our perspective. Okay, humans are the main agents in life. And it's humans are doing our thing. Humans are doing our thing. It's wait a second. What about the genes? Or especially here, it's well, what about the memes? Actually, instead of thinking ourselves as the agents, let's think about the information itself as the agent. And you might not, sure, it might not give the best XYZ, or it might be, we have to have both of them in our minds. But in general, just taking that frame to get us less egotistical, I think is a really powerful kind of move in space. So what do you think, by the way, about...
Can I ask you a question? Can I ask you a question?
Yes, go for it.
When you talk about what information wants, of course, I love that because that's how I feel about it and think about it. But, of course, as you have been saying, people hate it and they don't understand it. How do you get that across? Because I have trouble with this in the same way, probably. They don't want, in the sense of sitting there having a conscious experience of, oh, I'm longing, of course, genes are just bits of data and whatever. How do you personally get that over to people to get through their resistance to that idea? Because for people, so often it's like,
Yeah.
well, it's obvious that that information can't want anything. That's obvious. And they block their mind to it.
Yeah, that's a great question. So I guess one of my answers is I haven't done that much of it. Like I haven't like tried saying it that much. I haven't like formed the idea that well and like battered it with lots of people. I think that the my general thing though is I guess what I say is something. I think that the nice thing, as you kind of noted too, is that memes themselves, like internet memes, are a helpful way to talk about information wanting things. So you're just like, okay, like for me, like an example, like Me Too, you can think about it as that thing spread so widely because it had based within it was content with distribution built in. Like everybody who saw that was like, okay, great, I also want to spread this more because it's kind of like an invitation to share. And so I think that something like that, or like challenges might be an example of like TikTok dance challenges where you come in and like the challenge itself is saying, hey, spread me, don't forget to spread me. And so I guess I think that how I do it is by slowly getting people in with like internet memes as like a thing that has the spread me or copy me thing built into it. And then from there, kind of going deeper and deeper with people into the like rabbit hole of like, okay, we can think of things like religions like that, but instead of having really good copy me attributes, which they do, they have like, like Catholicism is really good at having more kids, but also religion and other things are really good at like getting themselves into the financial infrastructure and accessing money and energy. And so whether it's them or maybe again for the kids these days, something like Bitcoin or Wall Street bets, something like Bitcoin is a meme with kind of retention built in where you kind of have the uh, you have Bitcoin as a meme, and it is good at spreading, but it's also really good at it. People who have it make more money or whatever, and so they are. It can kind of like self-perpetuate instead of like falling out like so many other memes do. So I guess what I do is use
Yeah.
current day things.
But everything you're saying there, even I, with my view, I sort of allured in saying, yeah, but it's all about human agency because we're the ones who pick up this meme and not that meme and so on. The difficulty is, I think, to move from we made all these memes, we made these machinery, the computers and the servers and everything so we're in charge, we're the important ones, we're the ones who do have that I want because this is my mind and so I'm the agent. And everything you've said, that will be the way a lot of people come at it. The shift people have to make to really engage with this is a shift to we are agents, they are agents, the memes and the genes. These are agents all competing to throw information around. They're kind of they're not exactly equivalent to us, but in that sense they are. And that leads you into something else that terrifies people. And I know this from 20 years or however long it is of talking about it. The thought that our wants and decisions and so on are just information going on in a clever brain. And it's not because we've got this soul or spirit that wants things, or some sort of inner self that is the power that has agency and makes the choices, that we have free will, but the memes don't, is the simplest way of putting that response. And of course, I'm very, very happy to say, we don't have free will. All this stuff, this isn't the machine, and this thing here, my desk is a machine, and it's throwing stuff around. And the difference is only in complexity and structure and so on, not in its the fundamental nature of agency.
Yeah, no, I like that. And I think you're right to push back on, and even as I said, I think it's like, yeah, I'm still kind of like centering the human as much. And so it's like you kind of want to go from centering the human, talking about the internet memes, to like, wait a second, let's think about, a catchy song and see the world from the catchy song's perspective. If you're a non-catchy song, well, you just don't get into people's minds, and so you die off. But if you are a catchy song, then you're transmitting from mind to mind, and you're excited by that, and then people are going to remix you, and you get pop music or whatever. And so I think that like starting to talk from the perspective of the information or the meme is a crucial reframe. And then I think another thing that you're saying here that makes me think about how your work might relate to my work is that I think yours is connected, given the curiosity and perplexity that you have, is more connected to like the consciousness and free will and kind of like philosophy of mind side. And
And I think for me, I think that my work is more directed towards like how to moderate social media platforms, and how we should think about information flowing on them. And so it's less kind of, so hopefully this is to say I might try to dodge the like free will question and might try to like lead people towards the, instead of thinking about social media platforms as a bunch of humans, let's think of it as the information on the platforms and what the information itself wants and how we should like moderate it or censor it or whatever. Does that make sense?
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely does make sense. Yeah, well, good for you, because I couldn't do that. I am not engaged with social media and the modern world. In some ways, I'm just a old, out of touch person, which is odd given my enthusiasm for everything we're talking about. But where do people find time in their lives to do this stuff? I don't know. I think I've got better things to do. Digging the garden, for example.
That's a better use of time. Yeah, I mean, so how do you think about one thing? I think, I mean, and maybe part of this conversation is this, not extraction, but like thinking about all the stuff that and like connecting you into that world of the Gen Z TikTokers or whatever. How do you think about the memes? And a thing that you have thought of is like this idea of these Tremes, these like technological, or this like third replicator with bits, and that's something that I've been thinking about too. Where it's like, okay, you have this. These memes that go from mind to mind, but then you also have this like arrangement of bits in computers, and like that can be transferred as well. So tell me how you think about Tremes and how they connect to memes.
And what you just said is actually a very good way of, you make it easy for me to answer by what you just said, because I think what happened to me and over many years, and I came to this idea, after all, in 2008. That's when I gave my TED lecture. And it was just before that I was asked to write for a NASA book on cultural evolution in the cosmos. And I, one of those emails you get, will you write a chapter on? And I'm like, what? How can there be cultural evolution in the cosmos? And that set me thinking. And out of that came all these ideas. But the spark before that was, I was beginning to worry what you said about the digital bits and the how do they relate to mind psychological information? Is it just more of the same, or is it something different? And I suppose this was kind of early on in the internet memes phenomenon appearing. And I'm thinking, is this something fundamentally different, or is it just another kind of meme? Tricky in an academic writing point of view. Do they need a new name? I mean, should I call these just digital memes, and they're still memes, they're all memes, or is something different going on? And that question, I think, was lurking in my mind for a long time before that question about the cosmos hit me, and I really had to think it through. And I went for a walk with my daughter. She lives on a narrowboat, and the river was too high to go for a trip on the boat, and we ended up walking one behind the other on this narrow path for quite a long time. And I was just thinking and thinking and thinking, and the whole ideas just kind of bred themselves, if you like. And so where it went from there was to say, well, could there be another replicator? I mean, if you're going to give it another name, if there's something different going on here, I've got to have some principled way of thinking about there being a difference, because otherwise I'm just throwing out names. People do that all the time. And it's, it can be useless, and then they fizzle out. The only purpose of doing it would be if there's something fundamentally different going on. So I began to think about what happened when memes first appeared. Well, we know that in the sense that that's what meme theory is about. You have biology producing loads of different species, and then one of those species becomes a copying machine. In other words, when early humans began to imitate each other and pass information, copy, vary, and select information, fire making techniques or stone knapping techniques, whatever it might have been in the beginning, putting feathers in their hair, I don't know, whatever. That set off a new evolutionary process, and that's what we call memes. Could that process happen again? Well, when I thought about it that way, then it was immediately obvious to me, I might be wrong, but that's what it seemed immediately obvious to me, that what has happened is, of all these human meme machines, they began to produce books and cars and tables and glasses and pens and cups of tea and, any endless things. But then they kind of accidentally, because they wanted to, write letters and do whatever they wanted, talk to each other, quite accidentally in a way, they produced computers that were capable of copying information with variation and selection. So you've now got a new kind of copying machine, all the digital technology. But is that enough for a new evolutionary process? So there are two ways of answering that. One is to say, yeah, that's enough because it's digital and it's in silicon, and that's very different from this. But actually, I prefer to take a further step and say, well, those are memes because we're kind of in charge of them, or we're the main selectors, we're the main machines dealing with them. But if it came about that the machinery we created was doing the copying, varying, and selecting without us interfering, then there would be a new evolutionary process taken off. And that's why I decided originally to call it Teams, and then people thought I was talking about football, and I'm like, oh God. So I've never found a really satisfactory name. I've tried lots. That's how I came to that idea. And when I did so, which is now nearly 15 years ago, I don't think it was true, or if it was true, it was only very rarely or slightly true, but it's certainly true now. I mean, search engines are a simple example, but you can go much further than that. I think out there in cyberspace, there's all sorts of stuff going on that nobody has access to. There's stuff being copied, varied, selected. There's bits of code, going all over the place. We started all off and, control some of it, observe some of it, but there's unique things being produced, unique combinations of memes being produced all the time by the software that we've produced. And how much it can really take off without us seeing it, I don't know. I'm not an expert on how those things work. I hope some experts will tell me. But it leads to this really quite worrying thought, could say terrifying, that there's a new evolutionary process going on out there using all the stuff that we produced, still in a sense, in the same way that we're dependent on genes and biology for the memes, they're building on these meme machines. So in a way, we're essential, and those machines we created are essential, but the whole process could take off for its own sake. And that makes a big difference.
100%. Yeah, I think that's a good explanation. It's cool that some of the nicest times when you're when ideas come is when you're just walking around. You're like, okay, I guess I just got to walk with my own thoughts for a second, and then it kind of emerges. And I think you're right to say that it is weird because in some ways all of this stuff, like, genes and memes and these like bits or these tremes or whatever you want to call them, that those are all, you can kind of, if you want to, like mess around with and kind of like collapse them all into one, where it's like, okay, like the genes, technically the selection process is like, natural selection, but now we have so much like unnatural selection with GMOs, like the ability to like do bioengineering and like mess with the DNA itself. It's like, how much is it, how much are genes actually different than memes or whatever? And then also similarly, how much are the memes actually different than, these new kind of computer memes, the Tremes? And I think that question, I think your proposal is a relatively good one. I think it answers, or it brings up that question that you said, which is like, okay, if we have this new thing, which is instead of us actively choosing among them, which is how early internet stuff worked. It was like, oh, I like this picture, I like that picture. But now we have this new set of, AI or machine learning that is actively doing the kind of selection process and duplication and copying process itself. It's like, okay, that thing is its own new kind of replicator with its own new kind of objective function almost. And that's, I think what you're essentially doing is describing from a memetic perspective. Yeah, totally. What you're doing is describing from a memetic perspective, like AI safety concerns. Like, will this new replicator actually be aligned with human values, or how can we make it the case that as it's going to go crazy, how can we make it aligned? What do you think about that?
No, we can't. And the answer is obviously no and no. We can, as we can with the climate, as we can with biodiversity. What we do has an influence and makes the difference, but we're not in control. And I think that's so, yeah. But to go back to what you were saying earlier on in that bit, there are clear differences in the substrate of the information. So genes are, the information is the order of bases on molecules. Memes are very much more complex. There are so many more different types. But speech and writing and all of these things, and they're fundamentally based in the biology that we have of this kind of organism. Tremes, at least for the moment, are digital information encoded in silicon machinery. So there's that difference. But you also hit upon machine learning. Now, this is really important because I was hinting at earlier about how we may not be able to see what's going on. But at a very simple, or not that simple, but the whole idea of neural networks and artificial neural networks, I mean, and machine learning. If you set up a neural network, then even a simple one with only 3 or 4 layers, then and you set it going learning a task, like the very early ones. It fascinated me all that time ago when there were ones that could distinguish pictures of men and women or something, and then when you look at what's happened to all the connections within the neural network, you really don't know what it's done. You know what went in, you know the decisions it made, you know that all sorts of connections change their strength, just as happens between neurons in our heads, but you don't know exactly what it's done to do it. And the more complex the machine learning, the more that is the case. Now, if there's all this stuff going on all out there, and there's so many connections, and with the Internet of Things, it'll be even more so. But it's already masses of stuff. Then all this kind of learning will be going on that we don't know what it's doing and how it's doing it. We may or may not see what the inputs were and what the outputs were, and infer some kinds of changes that have gone on, but we can't see it. And one of the consequences of this to me is what I call, this might be a really bad term, but this is the way I think of it, as dark information. Information that we can't in principle see. And the more there are these kind of artificial intelligence systems operating on multiple machines, distributed about between different machines, sending information back and forth in the cloud, processing it, using it for machine learning and so on, then it's selfish information. It's going to require energy and machinery and storage space. And we keep giving it. We humans so want our ridiculous, trivial, endless email rubbish and social media stuff. Some of it's important, but it's just proliferating all the time. And the better the machines we have, and the more we love the technology, then the more we are willing to put fossil fuels and time and effort and destruction of the planet into producing more and more machinery. And why? The natural thought for many people is we're doing it for ourselves. We're in control. We're making this. Oh, if we do the Internet of Things, that'll be brilliant because then we'll be able to control our fridge from our car, whatever it is. But it's not for us. It's just the process of the information demanding more space to grow. And as long as we keep giving it. So what I mean by the dark information is, at the moment, because I think this is pretty recent, we probably, I don't know this, and if anyone's listening who can help me, please tell me, but we probably have a reasonable grip on how much storage space we need and processing power we need for the things that we know we're doing or that people are doing. But if I'm right about this process, then it will be taking up both those resources in ways that we can't see. And what we would find, and would be my prediction, it's always scary to stick your neck out on a prediction, but that we would find that we are building ever more stuff, and there's some of it we don't know why we need to do it. That however much more processing power and storage space and energy we give, there's an endless demand for more, and we can't keep up with it. And this would be pretty dire to add to the rest of the troubles of our poor planet.
Yeah, interesting. Yeah, I think that's what I'm hearing from you is that the prediction there is that we have the information that wants to continually consume more and more information and continue to take up space, and it wants to continue to replicate, and that we will get to the place, and we're already here, where it's already doing that, and we're building things that we're like, why are we even building this thing? And it's like, oh, I think that controlling your fridge from your car is a great example, where we can post-rationalize into that, and we can say, oh, we're doing this because it's more efficient, and look at how easy it is to do this. But actually, it's like that's just a rationalization of the information wanting more and more space and energy, and so. Yeah, I definitely hear you there. And I do think, and I'll send you this after the show, but there's this cool company, Anthropic AI, which is looking, and there's other companies who are doing this, who are trying to find out what's actually going on in these neural networks. How can we make them less black boxy? Because if possible, then some of this turning this like dark info, or the info that we don't know what's happening, into stuff that we can actually see transparently would be the long-term hope. With that in mind, how do you think about, kind of switching directions a bit here, but not totally, is like, one thing in the meme machine that you talk about, which I really enjoyed, was like, at the beginning of, genetic life, it's not like DNA was the first replicator. There were these other weird, just like, survival of the best chemical reaction thing happening. And then eventually we got DNA, and eventually we got multicellularism and sexual reproduction, all those kinds of things. And similarly with our kind of memetic world, it's like it started just as, you said, like putting a feather in your hair and like, going back and forth. And then we got language, and then we got writing and the internet and all these things. If you were to, continue that forward, how do you see the kind of, the sub, and one thing that you talked about in your book was like, especially the like fidelity piece, where it's like the ability to kind of go back and forth and to have things replicate with high fidelity. How do you see the progression of memes and what the like substrate itself, or what the kind of copying machinery will look like in its kind of end state?
Do you mean the progression of the current stuff we have, or are you asking a question about completely different kinds of technology?
I think I'm asking about different types, which is like, if you imagine the world in 3000, AD, where it's like, okay, what does the stuff look like? What does the memetic copying machinery look like at that time?
Well, first of all, I think it's extremely unlikely that there'll be humans around. Maybe we'll have died out. I mean, this is an interesting question, really, whether the way I've described things so far, the whole system requires us. We are the ones who have to build the mines that dig up if you're Chinese, that dig up the coal, and or that produce the batteries and things to run things electric cars and such like that. And certainly we are needed to build a new to improve the machinery that we use on our laptops and everything else. It's quite possible that we will survive long enough that the machinery will be able to replicate itself. And I don't mean replicate the information that it's throwing about. I mean actually replicate its own body, so that there'll be self-replicating computers and self-replicating robots and all that kind of thing, in which case there'd come a point when we were no longer necessary. Now, you asked about 3000. Well, I think it's possible that might happen. Or I think it's more likely, but who knows, that we will still be needed at the point where this planet is uninhabitable by humans and we die out, and then that would be the end of it. But let's suppose it carries on. You talked about fidelity. I'm not sure why that was important in your question, but we should note that the increase in the fidelity is very interesting, because genes are copied with incredibly high fidelity. There are lots of mistakes made, accidental combinations, mutations happen. Or, there are mistakes, and then there are repairing systems that put right mistakes that are made, and yet some still get through. That's one source of variation which you need for copying with variation and selection. But I think a lot of people forget that in sexually reproducing species, at least, that's not the main source of variation. The main source of variation is recombination of genes. So you put them in a different combination, you produce a different outcome. Then you get memes and the fidelity is incredibly low, absolutely at the opposite end. So when people, as far as we can tell, when people first started copying sounds between them, between each other, then there was very low fidelity. Now, because we have words, so words evolved as a way of increasing the fidelity. If you go or whatever, they're difficult to copy exactly, those things. Or you might go and that would be quite hard for somebody else to copy. But you start to make actual words, and you start to get reference, and you can point at something and go bleh. And that's been done with computers as well, with robots. I mean, that's been done, seeing how reference can emerge to sound. And so then the fidelity increases because you have discrete words and you can combine them in infinite number of ways. And so then you go on from there. So if fidelity increased in memes because of language and so on, but then it's a sudden leap when you get to digital replication of information, because that really is as close to 100% as you can imagine. So then the question becomes, what's the source of variation when you've got 100% accuracy? And we, at the moment, supply a lot of that variation. So going back to internet memes, the fun thing about them is the simple thing is there's millions of out there, and some get copied and passed on and others don't. But the fun thing, of course, and there's special technology that makes this very easy, is that people can take a meme, a visual meme or an auditory or any kind of meme, and they can change it a little bit and send it out again. And there's all these willing people out there in the world wanting to do the work of the memes by doing this, and the process runs on that. I think I've gone far away from your. Oh no, you are asking about 3,000 years. I cannot see in my own mind, as much as I've thought about it, what could happen as a fourth replicator. I've thought about that. And I suppose if you really push me and I push myself, the direction that I would go in is something like this. How does a self form? The self is a representation in a head of a being that doesn't exist, that has consciousness and free will, that is in control, and so on. And it forms by the information coming together and clustering around, because it's to the self is constructed by picking on a lot of memes, and memes can help themselves thrive by being part of me. So if I want this and I like this and I'm going to do this, and those memes, are benefiting from this self, and they all cluster around. Or in biology, you can see the transition from single cell to multicellular organisms as a benefit, as they get the benefit by being together rather than separately. Or you can see this in great memeplexes like religions, all sorts of awful ideas and ridiculous, pointless activities and harmful traditions all thrive by being part of what God wants. So I'm just talking about the kind of inevitable mechanism that causes things to group together and have effects as a group. Now, if that's happening out there in the Treme sphere, where there is all this information going around, that it will create kind of artificial selves out there, artificial entities that have the desire to replicate the information within them and even maybe themselves. And then they would be forming a new kind of world in which they are interacting with each other and competing with each other to get more information, to get more control and power and what have you. And given that, we would have already have made, cameras and recording things, that they can get all that information, they can affect us through the machinery we've made, they could be affecting us. Or if we're all dead and we did reach that stage, then that would all be going on out there, and there'd probably be entities out there going, I wonder where this all came from. Were those funny little squishy beings with two legs? What? No, how could they have led to us? No, obviously not. God must have made us, or whatever they'd be thinking. I don't know what they'd be thinking. Now, that is seriously wild speculation. I don't give it to you as a serious idea for what I think is going to happen. I answer it in the spirit of curiosity and perplexity when, I'm a bit just really trying to push my own thoughts. That's the sort of direction they go.
No, I love that. I think that and I just, backing off the stack there for a second, I think that one part of what you said, which I think is super good to realize, is like when we imagine this long future, it's like, how long do we stay alive? And I know like some of the experts say that, like that humanity itself has like a 1 in 6 chance of like surviving until the end of 2100, which is like very low, very low. And so things are getting more intense. And hopefully we'll be able to survive ourselves, but we'll see. And I think one crucial part about that is that with this new third replicator, AI or Tremes or whatever, it's like its ability, as you said, like right now we have this weird kind of like metering mechanism on the machines almost, where it's like we generally like they don't get access to energy as they want. Like we are almost to some extent ones that can kind of like say no wait, you can't just like self-replicate. Like there aren't that many self-replicating robots that exist today that are just like paper clipping and like creating more and more of themselves. And so it's like information is doing a really good thing, but it's really cheap from an energy perspective to share these bits and these streams. And then once those things get better and better at like actively getting into the energy infrastructure, that I think is like a worrying future when they can just self-replicate without caring about us. So just wanted to like double plus good on that. And I think that you're right that like, all right, the other thing I want to say from what you said, there's a hilarious thing of like, we have these digital, internet memes or Tremes that are copying, and it's like, oh, but it's perfect fidelity. Well, luckily, there's all these willing people who are doing the remixing process. So it's like they've kind of inserted us as the weird, like, kind of sexual reproduction or side of them, which I think is a funny thing. And I think what you're saying about the like, the deep future is roughly. I mean, a lot of what you're saying, I think, is like directionally correct, which is like these replicators, they essentially determine the eons of life. And so we had genes as the primary replicator for 4 billion years, and then we've had memes as the primary replicator for 200,000 years. And now we're going to have these Tremes or these bits as the main replicator. And yeah, what they're going to do is increase their information substrate and make it better and get more access to energy, and will become these kind of self-replicating things that will like go into the galactic civilization, and be able to copy themselves with energy and go forth. So I think that's all kind of, I think it's all weird, but I think it's all directionally correct. So as we wrap up here, we're at the end of time. I guess I want to ask, well, maybe I want to ask, there's a lot of different ways I could go here. Well, yeah, let me ask this. The first is that like, for what advice would you give to like young people who are looking to explore memes? Like how should they like go deeper in this world, or what kind of questions do you have, or what advice would you have for young folks?
Interestingly, I think I would give the same advice as I would in my days in parapsychology when I was investigating ESP and telepathy and all these kinds of ghosts and what have you. Don't do it unless you really, 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 really want to. Memetics now is a fringe field. You won't find it easy to get grants or labs or anything. It's really, really hard. But if we're going back to curiosity and perplexity, if you really are driven to understand this, go for it. But it's not going to be easy. So really my sensible advice would be, as a professor, don't do it. Well, I was given that advice about parapsychology a long time ago by a man I greatly respected who was a professor of parapsychology, and he said, don't do it. And I did it anyway. And of course, I'm really glad I did it, even though after less than 10 years, I had become convinced that there were no paranormal phenomena and that the thing was a dead end. What a learning experience that was. And I learned one of the biggest lessons any scientist has to learn is how to see when you're wrong and change your mind and move on. I think if young people who know a load of stuff I don't know all about the technology and the way it works and all sorts of other things, academia is so exciting at the moment, there's so many ideas. I think there'll be some who will do that despite my warnings and anyone else's warnings, and amazing things will happen. But I can't give any clearer advice than that. Caution.
No, I love that. It's like, hey, watch out. This is a rabbit hole that you could go down. And it's like not necessarily in any specific, like field, like any like as well-defined field. So it's like, kind of be wary as you go down there. So I think that's good kind of life advice for like, it's kind of like thinking about, it's like my mom would be like, hey, Reese, like, how are you going to make money? Like, don't forget to make money, So I think that's always good life advice. Well, Susan, thank you for the conversation today. I think it's fascinating to hear where you're at with all these things, and thank you so much again. What were you going to say?
I was just going to say, if you're driven by money, definitely don't do it. I never have been. I've been lucky enough to be able to survive, sometimes slightly tenuously, but that's never been what I was after. But I would just like to tell you one little story, which is a little bit of hope. Some researchers in Belgium did a study of the witch trials. They're historians primarily, I think. And they'd asked the question, were the witch trials of a benefit to the murderous, whatever they're called, the Spanish Inquisition, the people who enforced all the horrible burning at the stake and all that? Was it to the advantage of the culture that they lived in? Was it to the advantage of the people who were burnt at the stake? Obviously not. What was it to advantage? And they came up with the conclusion from this study that it was to the advantage of those memes themselves. Now that popped out of historians. Somewhere these kinds of ideas are going to come out where people can show that selfish memes is the best way to explain what's happening. So in addition to that question I just asked was, it doesn't matter really what field you're working in. If you get obsessed by memes, that might just be the field where you can do something that will propel memetics forward. So I'm kind of being more optimistic. Have a go, but don't expect to get rich. Don't want
That's
to.
great. Yeah, and if you're excited by it, there's a small crew of us. Yeah, exactly. And if you do get excited by us, you can at least hang out with Susan and I. If nothing else, you can hang out with us. So again, Susan, thank you so much for your time today. Do you have any other so yeah, definitely check out Susan's book, The Meme Machine. Also her other ones on consciousness and stuff. She's also doing cool research on copy bots these days, which are these bots that kind of say weird words to each other and imitate each other, and then cultural evolution happens from that. Is there anything else you want to tell our listeners as any place to find you on the internet webs or anything to check out?
Well, my website has everything that I think is, I always put up everything that I write. I put it on my website, which is susanblackmore.uk. And my TED lecture is obviously the starting point for the ideas that we've been talking about today. And there's a link on the website for that. So that's the place to go, I would say.
Beautiful. Yeah, susanblackmore.uk. And thank you again, Susan, for your time today. And we will hope that the memes within us will be able to shape the Tremes to kind of be aligned with human values as we go forth. So thank you again, Susan, and goodbye, everybody.
That would be nice. I've enjoyed it. Thank you very much. And good luck with your ideas on information that once.